If there is one subject I keep returning to more than almost any other after years of doing this work, it's this one. Surprisingly, it isn't about why avoidant people disappear, what their silence really means, or even how to recover after experiencing their hot and cold behavior. Those topics matter, and we'll continue exploring them here. But the question people quietly carry, the one they often hesitate to ask out loud, goes much deeper. They want to know one thing. Did the avoidant truly bond with me? Was the connection real? Did they genuinely form a meaningful emotional attachment? Or was the relationship only important to me while they experienced it as something temporary, distant, or easy to leave behind? This question stays with people because after an avoidant relationship ends, the deepest pain usually isn't the breakup itself. More often, it's the uncertainty that follows. Time after time, I hear people describe moments of incredible closeness. They remember conversations that felt life-changing, quiet moments filled with emotional safety, and experiences that convinced them they had found something truly rare. During those moments, the relationship felt completely real. Then everything shifted. Distance appeared. Communication slowly faded. Silence replaced connection. Suddenly, the avoidance behavior seemed to tell an entirely different story, one that suggested the relationship never meant very much to them at all. That contradiction leaves many people emotionally stuck. They no longer know whether to trust what they experienced or what eventually happened. Their heart remembers genuine closeness, while the withdrawal seems to erase it. Living between those two completely different realities creates deep emotional confusion. Today, I want to help clear that confusion, not by offering comforting words alone. Comfort without understanding only brings temporary relief. Real peace comes from seeing what is actually happening beneath the surface. The truth is that emotional bonding for an avoidant rarely looks like the way securely attached people build relationships. If you're expecting the usual signs of attachment, you'll probably miss the evidence over and over again because you're looking through the wrong lens. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear could completely change how you interpret the past. Before we explore the specific phrases avoidant people often say after they've formed a genuine bond, it's important to understand what bonding actually feels like from their point of view. Without that foundation, everything else can easily be misunderstood. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, emotional bonding is rarely peaceful or comfortable. It doesn't slowly grow through increasing closeness and emotional ease the way it often does in secure relationships. Instead, it feels disruptive. Their inner world has been built over many years around keeping emotional distance. Those protective walls didn't appear overnight. They were built little by little through painful experiences and strengthened over time. Deep inside, often without realizing it, they learned that vulnerability felt dangerous, overwhelming, or emotionally expensive. Distance became safety, independence became protection, relying on themselves became the way they survived emotionally. So when someone unexpectedly reaches beyond those defenses and becomes emotionally important, it doesn't simply feel exciting or romantic. It feels like their entire emotional system has been interrupted. Despite every effort to remain independent, another person has found a place inside their private world that wasn't supposed to be accessible. That experience can feel less like falling in love and more like losing control over something they believed they had mastered. Imagine waking up one day and realizing another person has quietly become emotionally significant in ways you never planned. They now occupy space in your thoughts. They affect your emotions. Their presence matters more than you ever intended. For many avoidant individuals, that realization feels overwhelming. It feels less like welcoming someone in and more like discovering an unexpected opening in walls they spent years building. Once that kind of attachment forms, it becomes much harder to simply switch off than many people assume. That's why genuine avoidant bonding often reveals itself in unusual ways. Instead of dramatic love declarations or constant reassurance, their attachment usually appears indirectly. The clues are quieter, more subtle, and often hidden inside everyday conversations. Here's where it gets interesting, because one of the earliest verbal signs that an avoidant has already formed a meaningful bond sounds surprisingly self-critical, rather than romantic. Instead of openly confessing deep feelings, they begin revealing uncomfortable truths about themselves. You may hear them say things like, "I'm not very good at relationships. I've always handled life better on my own. I don't really know how to do this." Or even, "I'll probably mess this up." At first, those comments can sound like passing insecurity or casual conversation, but they often carry much more meaning than they appear to. When an avoidant voluntarily shares these personal limitations without being pushed, they're quietly showing you something they normally protect very carefully. They're allowing you to see a vulnerable part of themselves that almost nobody else gets to see. Not completely, not with perfect openness. Instead, they reveal it indirectly, almost hiding the truth inside a casual sentence that can easily be brushed aside if the moment suddenly feels too emotionally intense. That balance is intentional. Their words remain deeply honest while also giving them room to retreat if necessary. For someone whose natural instinct is to stay emotionally guarded, offering even a small glimpse into those hidden fears is rarely random. More often than not, it's one of the clearest signs that you've already become emotionally important in ways they may not fully understand themselves. What they're really doing in that moment is handing you a small piece of their truth while quietly leaving themselves an exit in case the experience becomes too uncomfortable. If their honesty is met with criticism, pressure, or misunderstanding, they can quickly step back and convince themselves the conversation never mattered very much. So how can you tell the difference between a genuine bonding signal and someone simply making excuses? The answer usually appears in what happens immediately afterward. When an avoidant has truly opened up, even a little, there is often a brief silence that follows. It may last only a few seconds, but something important is happening inside them. Their nervous system is carefully watching your response. They want to know whether the vulnerable part they just revealed will be accepted with kindness or become another reason to rebuild their emotional walls. If your reaction remains calm, understanding, and free from the urge to fix them, analyze them, or push the conversation even deeper, something meaningful begins to happen internally. Their mind quietly records a completely different experience. It learns that revealing something painful did not lead to rejection. It discovers that vulnerability did not automatically result in losing control. Most importantly, it begins recognizing that this particular person may actually be safe with the parts they usually hide from everyone else. That realization often strengthens the emotional bond much more than either person realizes, even if the conversation quickly moves on and nothing dramatic seems to happen. Don't miss what comes next because the second sign surprises almost everyone. It is something I often call selective emotional memory, and it catches many people completely off guard. Imagine mentioning a random story during an ordinary conversation. Maybe it's a childhood memory, a passing opinion, or a small personal detail that didn't seem important at all. Weeks pass, sometimes even months. You've completely forgotten you ever mentioned it. Then, without warning, the avoidant brings it up again, not in a vague way, not as a rough memory. They remember the exact detail, the situation, and sometimes even the words you originally used. That kind of memory is rarely accidental. It reveals something happening beneath the surface that many people never notice. Although avoidant individuals often appear emotionally distant on the outside, their inner world can spend far more time reflecting on the people who genuinely matter than they ever let anyone see. That's why this next sign is even more revealing, and you won't want to miss it. Conversations that seem completely ordinary on the surface often continue inside an avoidant's mind long after they have ended. This is one of the clearest signs of genuine attachment because they don't process everyone this way. With most people, they stay present enough to interact while still keeping emotional distance. Information comes and goes without leaving much behind. But once someone becomes emotionally important, everything begins to change. Small details naturally stay with them. Not because they're making an effort to remember every word you say, but because your inner world has quietly become meaningful to them. When they bring up something you barely remember mentioning, they're showing that your words stayed alive in their thoughts long after the conversation ended. That lingering attention says far more than most people realize. It means you occupied emotional and mental space even when you weren't physically there. An avoidant may never tell you how often they revisit those memories, but their ability to remember them tells the story without needing an explanation. They remember because your presence has become significant. And your presence became significant because, without fully realizing it, they've started organizing part of their emotional world around you. That's not something they do casually. It happens slowly, quietly, and often long before they understand it themselves. Stay with me because the next sign is even easier to miss. Yet once you recognize it, you'll never hear these conversations the same way again. The third sign often hides inside what sounds like completely normal conversation. I call it future inclusion. It happens when an avoidant casually places you somewhere in their future without you asking. Maybe they mention a restaurant they'd like to visit with you someday. Maybe they talk about a trip the two of you would enjoy together. Sometimes they describe an event months ahead and naturally assume you'll be there beside them. For someone with a secure attachment style, these comments may not seem especially meaningful. People who feel connected often imagine future experiences together without giving it much thought. But for an avoidant, this is rarely casual. Their emotional world is built around independence. Long before relationships begin, they usually picture the future as something they will manage entirely on their own. Their plans revolve around self-sufficiency instead of emotional dependence. Those protective walls don't only create distance in the present, they also guard the future they imagine for themselves. That's exactly why these spontaneous future references matter so much. The moment they naturally picture you standing beside them somewhere ahead, they're revealing that you've already been welcomed into a part of their inner world that very few people ever reach. Without consciously planning it, they've made room for you inside the life they quietly carry in their imagination. Many times they won't even realize how meaningful those words are, yet psychologically, it's one of the strongest signs that genuine attachment has already begun to grow. Rather than saying, "You matter to me," they're expressing it in the safest way they know how. Their future quietly includes you before they're emotionally ready to admit why. Don't click away, because the next sign is one of the rarest, and when it happens, it often carries enormous meaning. The fourth sign is something I think of as protected disclosure. It happens when an avoidant trusts you with something they've never shared with anyone else. It doesn't have to be a dramatic secret. Sometimes it's an old fear, a deeply personal memory, a private struggle, or simply a part of themselves they've kept hidden for years. The importance isn't found in how shocking the information is. The importance lies in the fact that they chose you to hear it. When someone who naturally protects their inner world allows you into a place almost nobody else has entered, they're expressing a level of trust that words alone could never fully capture. What they reveal may seem surprisingly ordinary to someone else. It could be a childhood memory they've never spoken about, a quiet fear they've carried for years, a personal belief they've kept hidden, or a unique way they see the world that has stayed behind emotional walls for a very long time. To another person, it might sound like a small detail. To the avoidant, it feels incredibly significant, because what they're really offering isn't information. They're offering access. They're allowing you to step inside a private part of themselves that almost nobody has ever seen. When an avoidant has genuinely bonded, there is often a moment where they hand you a small piece of that hidden world. True to their attachment style, they rarely do it directly. They'll share something meaningful, then quickly soften it. They might laugh, change the subject, minimize what they just revealed, or present it so casually that if your reaction feels unsafe, they can convince themselves the moment never really mattered. That combination of honesty followed by emotional retreat is incredibly common. The openness is real. The escape route is just as real. What matters most isn't only what they shared, it's what sharing required from them internally. Every emotionally guarded person has protective walls, but avoidant individuals often spend years strengthening theirs. When they allow someone beyond even one small section of those defenses, they're doing far more than simply continuing a conversation. They're lowering a barrier that was never designed to move, not for acquaintances, not for most partners, sometimes not for anyone at all. If your presence became the reason that wall opened, even a little, then something meaningful has already happened inside them. Your consistency created enough emotional safety for their nervous system to take a risk it usually avoids. That kind of trust isn't casual. It's one of the strongest signs that a deep emotional bond has already formed. Here's where things become even more surprising, because the final sign often creates the greatest confusion. Before I explain it, I want to be very clear. This isn't meant to justify hurtful behavior or encourage anyone to stay in an unhealthy relationship. It's simply an explanation of what may sometimes be happening beneath the surface. The fifth sign is what I call personal withdrawal. This isn't the usual distance avoidant people create when they simply need space. It's different. The withdrawal becomes emotionally charged because the attachment itself has become stronger than their nervous system knows how to handle. Instead of quietly disappearing without explanation, they begin telling you why they need distance. And those explanations focus specifically on you. They may say things like, "You make me feel too much. This is becoming overwhelming. I don't know how to handle this with you." Or, "Being close to you feels too intense." Notice the difference, because it's incredibly important. They're no longer talking about relationships in general. They're no longer speaking about people as a whole. They're talking about you specifically. That distinction matters more than many people realize. When an avoidant hasn't developed a meaningful emotional attachment, distance usually requires very little explanation. They simply step back. There is no need to identify one particular person as the source of their emotional discomfort. But once genuine attachment exists, everything changes. Their nervous system is no longer reacting to just anyone. It's reacting to someone unique. Someone whose emotional importance has quietly grown beyond what their protective defenses know how to manage. That's why these moments can feel so confusing. The very closeness they've secretly wanted can also become the thing that overwhelms them the most. And what comes next may be the most revealing part of all, so make sure you stay with me. In those moments, the person they're trying to create distance from isn't simply the feeling of intimacy, it's you. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your presence now carries emotional weight that challenges the protective system they've depended on for years. Their sense of independence begins to feel less certain. The emotional balance they've worked so hard to maintain starts to shift. Although the way they respond can be painful, their words often reveal something important. By making you the center of the explanation, they're indirectly admitting how deeply you've affected them. This isn't the healthy expression of love you deserve, and it isn't emotional maturity. But from a psychological point of view, it often reflects the intensity of a bond they no longer know how to comfortably hold. Stay with me, because the next sign looks completely different. It isn't revealed through emotional conversations. It quietly appears through everyday actions, and many people miss it without realizing what they're seeing. This sixth sign speaks more through behavior than words, yet the language surrounding those actions tells an equally meaningful story. I call it quiet protection. We've touched on this pattern before, but when viewed through the lens of genuine attachment, its meaning becomes even clearer. When an avoidant becomes deeply attached, they often begin caring for your well-being, almost without thinking about it. These gestures usually aren't dramatic or obvious. They're practical, they're thoughtful, they're personal. They notice the little things that make your life easier. They remember details that others would quickly forget. They quietly solve problems before you even mention them. They recognize needs that only someone paying close attention would notice. These actions rarely happen by accident. They grow naturally from genuine emotional investment. Yet the most revealing part often comes immediately afterward. Instead of admitting how much they cared, they'll quickly downplay everything they just did. They'll shrug and say it was nothing. They'll insist anyone would have done the same thing. They'll act as though the effort required no thought at all. That quiet understatement is often the biggest clue. Their behavior communicates deep care, while their words try to hide just how meaningful that care actually is. The contrast between thoughtful action and casual dismissal is one of the clearest ways an avoidant expresses attachment while still protecting themselves from revealing how emotionally invested they've become. Someone with very little emotional investment has no reason to minimize thoughtful actions, because those actions carry very little emotional weight for them in the first place. But once genuine attachment exists, everything changes. They suddenly feel the need to hide the importance of what they've done. They'll quietly show up when you need them. They'll protect you without making a scene. They'll remember the things that matter most to you. Then almost immediately, they'll dismiss the entire moment by saying, "It was nothing. Anyone would have done that. It really wasn't a big deal." Listen carefully, because those explanations are rarely the full truth. They're the shield. The action itself tells the real story. Their behavior reveals far more than the words they use to explain it away. Don't click away just yet, because this final part may be the most important message in today's conversation. We've explored 6 powerful signs that often suggest an avoidant has genuinely formed a deep emotional bond. But understanding these signs also carries a risk if they're misunderstood. I want to speak openly about that because it's incredibly important. The danger is believing this information means you should continue waiting for someone who isn't currently able to give you the relationship you deserve. It's easy to understand why that temptation exists. When you've spent months, or even years, wondering whether the relationship meant as much to them as it did to you, finally hearing that the attachment may have been real can feel deeply comforting. After living with uncertainty for so long, that confirmation can feel like finally finding solid ground after wandering in circles. Naturally, a part of you wants to hold on to that feeling, but there are 2 different truths that need to remain separate. Everything we've discussed today may confirm that the emotional bond was real. It may explain that the closeness you experienced wasn't something you imagined. It may validate the emotional moments, the memories they quietly carried, the personal parts of themselves they trusted you with, the thoughtful acts of care, and even the confusing push and pull behavior that often reflected an attachment running far deeper than it appeared. Their later withdrawal may have hidden that reality, but it didn't necessarily erase it. However, there is another truth that is just as important. None of this proves that the relationship itself was capable of becoming healthy. Genuine attachment and emotional readiness are not the same thing. Someone can honestly love another person while still lacking the emotional ability to build a secure and consistent relationship. An avoidant may feel deeply connected while still being guided by unresolved fears, protective habits, and a nervous system that continues interpreting closeness as danger. That creates one of the hardest realities to accept. The feelings may be genuine, the attachment may be genuine, yet the relationship can still fall short of providing the consistency, emotional safety, and steady presence that every healthy partnership needs. Those truths don't cancel each other out. They exist side by side. Accepting both at the same time is often the most balanced and honest perspective available. Before we finish, I want to leave you with one final thought that may change the story you've been telling yourself all this time. Learning that an avoidant genuinely bonded with you should never lower your standards. It doesn't remove their responsibility. It doesn't mean you should keep waiting, keep proving your love, or remain emotionally available while they continue living behind their defenses. What this understanding can change is something much more personal. It can change the way you see yourself. Maybe you've questioned your instincts. Maybe you've wondered if you imagined the connection. Maybe you've asked yourself whether your heart created a depth that was never really there, or whether you can trust your own ability to recognize emotional closeness ever again. Here's another possibility to consider. Maybe your instincts weren't wrong at all. Maybe you recognize something real long before the other person had the emotional tools or courage to fully recognize it themselves. The closeness you felt wasn't simply wishful thinking. The bond you sensed wasn't an illusion. Those moments that felt deeply meaningful truly were meaningful. You weren't loving someone who felt nothing. You were connected to someone who felt more than they knew how to manage. The tragedy wasn't necessarily the absence of emotion. It was the absence of the emotional capacity to remain present inside those feelings. That distinction matters because once you understand it, you no longer have to blame your own heart. You don't have to believe that loving deeply was your mistake. You don't have to silence your intuition the next time you experience a connection that feels real simply because you're afraid of being hurt again. Instead, trust what your heart recognized. Your ability to notice emotional depth isn't a weakness. It's one of your greatest strengths. The fact that someone couldn't consistently meet you there doesn't make your perception inaccurate. And whether that avoidant eventually faces the attachment they formed or quietly carries it beneath years of emotional protection, one truth remains. Every carefully remembered detail, every personal story they trusted you with, every future plan that naturally included you, every quiet act of care, every painful moment when they stepped away while telling you that you were the reason, all of those moments pointed toward the very same truth. Deep down, they knew who had reached their heart, and deep down, so did you. The bond you felt was not imaginary. Your intuition was not misleading you. You recognized something real from the very beginning, and if this message helped bring you clarity, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more insights that help you understand attachment on a deeper level, and share it with someone who may still be questioning whether what they experienced was ever real. Sometimes the greatest healing begins the moment confusion is replaced with understanding.